When it comes to planning your brunch or breakfast for friends, obviously fruit is a natural component. But too often I think we get stuck in a rut where maybe we just do sliced fruit or we do fruit salad. Today I'm going to share with you an item similar to a fruit salad, but I like to call it an exotic spice-infused fruit cocktail. So let's get started. First off, in our pot we have 3 cups of water. We're creating a simple syrup and we want this to be fairly thick so that we have a nice little bit of body to that. So we're using equal parts of sugar and water. So in the pot I've already started heating up. We've got 3 cups of water. And to that, we're going to add in 3 cups of sugar, granulated sugar, equal quantity. So we're just going to give that a little bit of a stir to help that begin dissolving. For the flavor aspect, first off, we've got a couple of mint tea bags. Mint obviously goes very well with fruit, and mint tea is a great seasoning element for a lot of different items, from desserts to fruit salads and soups. Then, something that you may have heard about but perhaps have not worked with is star anise or star anise. It's actually the dried seed pod of a Chinese evergreen bush and has a really nice, fragrant, aromatic kind of licorice type quality. Now if you're not a fan of licorice, you can leave it out. You could put in some cinnamon, some cloves if you wanted, go with some warmer spices. But because I'm doing kind of more of a light, bright flavor profile here, we're working with the star anise. And for this, I like to just break this up into the little pieces here. That way, the more surface area we've got and the more of those little seed pods that we work out, the more flavor we're going to get coming out in a shorter amount of time. It's all about infusing this with flavor. Otherwise, we just simply have a sugar syrup on our hands. For the fresh ginger, we're going to be straining all these items out. That's why I'm not concerned about putting those in there on their own. So for the ginger, I've just sliced those into what I call little coins. I've left the skin on. We don't care about that because it all comes out before we serve it. And we're going to smash that over here with the cutting board and our chef's knife. Put that on the board. If you have a knife with a bolster, this thick part between the handle and the blade, you want to position it closer down towards the front end of the board, so that you can get that blade to go flush with the board. And I like to think of that as a big, whatever the nastiest bug you have in your area is, think of that as a big giant bug under there and give a good whack. We're going to put that right in there. And that way we crush it, we get a lot more flavor coming out, but we don't have to go to the work of actually chopping it up nice and fine. For basil, now basil and fruit might seem like an odd combination, but it works really well. What a lot of times people don't realize is that basil actually is a member of the mint family. Any herb that has a square stem, like our basil here, and also sage, are both related to mint. Mint has a distinct square stem. Now when you look at this, you might notice it's not really looking too good. It's kind of dark, it's got some sunburning on there. Certainly not what we would expect if we were wanting to use that as a garnish for the top of a menu item. But as I like to point out, you know what? Guests always say, do you want us to use that? It's kind of wilted, it's not looking so hot. Herbs are a lot like people. They may not always be the prettiest on the outside, but they're still good stuff on the inside. So we're just going to kind of crumble that up, break that up. That's going to help break down the cell walls so we get more of that flavor coming out and we get that infused in there. For our citrus, we have the juice of 1 orange. I like to juice that with a fork. And by stabbing that multiple times to break up the flesh of the orange, not your hand of course, you're going to get a lot more juice coming out than if you just try to manpower it. I like to throw the shells in there as well. It's going to give us more flavor, and as I said, we strain all that out at the end. Squeeze that lemon juice in there. And then the final thing that we're going to put in is the lime juice as well. And I want a little bit of that in the finished product. So over here, I'm going to first zest in my lime. For this, since we need fine little bits, I prefer a rasp style zester. They're great. Do that right over your bowl so that the oils that are going to spray off go into the bowl so we get that flavor. A lot easier than using a box grater. And I just like to roll that lengthwise. Sometimes people just do short little strokes, but then you end up with areas where you're missing it. So by doing it lengthwise, you pretty much get all of the zest off and maximum flavor. Finally, the lime juice goes into our compote as well, or our syrup here. Ultimately, what we're making could be called a compote. Compotes basically are usually the fruit is simmered and cooked. In this case, we're just cooking and infusing the syrup, and we're going to allow the fruit to soak, or what technically is called macerate, which is basically marinate, but in the fruit world instead of the meat world. So there we go. So we're going to let that sit. I've turned this off, and we're going to let that sit and infuse. The longer that can sit, the more flavor we're going to have in our finished product. Next, we're ready to move on to the fruit. You can actually use any sort of fruit that you like. I prefer to use a variety of melons as well as pineapple. If you've got some nice mangoes, those are terrific in here. Papaya would work really great. When you're selecting fruit, one of the first things that I recommend looking for, actually smelling for, is the aroma. Take a whiff of that. If it doesn't smell like the fruit that it is, then it's not going to taste any better. So that's the first clue. Although if it's been chilled in the cooler, it's not going to have much aroma to begin with, so let it come to room temperature. With cantaloupe, take a look at the exterior. You want to look for more of the kind of creamy brown color underneath the netting. The more of the brown color that you have and the less green, the better off, the riper it's going to be. One of the other tricks sometimes that works is to just gently press on the, not the stem end, but on the blossom end down at the bottom. If there's just a little bit of yield, then that's usually an indication as well that it's on the riper side. Of course, if your thumb goes all the way through, that's not a good sign. Put it back and hope no one saw you stick your fingers in there. So to cut up the cantaloupe, one of the things that I find people doing all the time, if they have not learned the professional technique for cutting melons, is they cut it into wedges, and then they have to cut the skin off each wedge and cut it up individually. It works, but it's really time consuming. So instead, trim off the two ends. We're going to cut off the top. You cut both of these off until you expose the colored portion of the flesh. Then starting where the skin and the flesh meet, we're going to cut with the curvature of the fruit. Just kind of going down around. If you miss a few spots and you have green showing, that's okay. You can always go back and catch that later on. Of course, if your melon turns into a cube when you're done, you cut too much off. So we want to keep that round shape to it. Next, for the melon, we're going to cut that in half. Always brace your fruit so that it doesn't slide around. Then we can easily scrape out those seeds right into the garbage bowl. When you're working, if you use a bowl beside you for all of your garbage, it's a lot easier. You don't have to worry about anything falling into the trash. And if it should fall into the bowl, well, we just have a lot of other vegetables in there, so that's not a big deal. For cutting up melons, my recommended method, we want these to be nice and fairly finely diced, about 1/4 of an inch. Keep in mind, we're serving this in a martini glass, and we're going to be eating it with a spoon. So general rule of thumb for anything eaten with a spoon, especially for soups, is the items that you're putting in there should be no larger than will fit in the bowl of a spoon. For instance, if we use this spoon, that's the size we have to be concerned with. So if you're using a smaller spoon, you need to cut your items accordingly. First off, we're going to cut this into quarters. And then you have these little tips. I like to slice those off so that our fruit can rest there safely without us having to worry about cutting our fingers. That way it's going to be nice and sturdy. And now we can go ahead and slice these into thinner slices to begin with, so that we can then dice that up into about 1/4 inch dice. Stack those up, slice those lengthwise, and then dice across. And our fruit is going to go into our bowl with that citrus zest. When selecting pineapple, again, aroma is an important indicator. If it smells nice and sweet, that's a good sign. One cautionary note I offer with pineapple is if it's too sweet, oftentimes they will start to ferment if it's gotten too old, and so you're going to smell kind of a sour smell to that. So you want to avoid that, but do have a nice aromatic pineapple aroma to that. Some people will say that the easier you can pull out the spines of the top, the riper it is. I've been able to pull those out even on ones that weren't very ripe, so I don't generally use that as an indication of ripeness. Basically, color and aroma are your two guidelines for pineapple in my experience. First off, to take off the top, simply just give it a good twist. that top's going to come right off. If you live in a tropical area, you can actually put that in the ground and probably end up with a pineapple plant growing out of it, but today we're going to discard that. For trimming it, we're going to follow the same method we did with the melons. We're going to trim off both ends so that we expose the flesh. And then, again, noting where the skin and the flesh meet, we're just going to cut with the curvature of the fruit. But you do need to cut a little bit deeper with this because of the fact that we have the eyes, and if you can avoid having to go back and do a lot of trimming later on, it's going to be a lot easier for you. So we're going to cut downward. You can always go back again if you need to get those eyes out, but if we can get a little bit deep the first time, the easier it will be. And then one last swipe, and we are done with that. Now we're only going to use half of this pineapple today, so we're going to slice that in half. I'm going to show you how to take out that core. Again, brace that, slice that, we'll get rid of that. Cut side down so we have a nice sturdy surface. We're going to cut this into quarters, and then we will stand this on its end and make a little cut straight down to take out the core. Now the core is edible. It's quite fibrous, so it's pretty much a cooked snack. That's about it. But you can take that, you could dice that up, put that into a bottle of champagne vinegar or rice wine vinegar, let that infuse for several weeks, and you're going to have a nice mild flavored pineapple vinegar you can use for salads. On the other hand, you could also infuse it into a bottle of vodka, and I'll let you decide what you want to do with that. But we're going to discard that today. We're going to slice this into thin strips just as we did before with our melon, because we need these to be about 1/4 inch dice, and then we can very easily slice across into bite-sized pieces. Now that we have the fruit complete, we're going to bring that over. Our syrup has been infusing and it's ready to go. When in doubt, always just give a little bit of a sample. I tasted it a moment ago and it tastes great. You can let this cool down completely. It's not really necessary as long as it's not hot so that you don't cook that fruit. And then we're just simply straining this right over the fruit. And then if you can, take a spoon. Not only do we want to make sure that we get the juice out of the tea bags there, but we want to be able to squeeze the juice out of those citrus shells so we get maximum flavor and don't leave any of that good stuff behind. And that should be good. This you're going to take, now that it's cooled down for the most part, it's not really hot, we're going to cover that. You could leave that slightly open on one side just so you have a little bit of space for any remaining heat to escape. Let that sit at room temperature until it's completely cooled down. Then you can put that in the refrigerator overnight. Now that our fruit is infused and has been sitting and chilling overnight, we're ready to serve it. Now, because I'm calling it a fruit cocktail, I personally like to serve it in martini glasses. It kind of ties in the whole fruit cocktail name. We're not putting any sort of alcoholic beverage in there, but I suppose you probably could add a little champagne if you wanted to. You just want to make sure that you don't get too much liquid. So I like to spoon a little bit into the bottom first and then top it with a little bit of the infused syrup so that people can sip that after they finish up with their fruit. The berries I purposely left out until we're garnishing it now, because if you put the berries in there and then mix that and stir that around, they're going to break up and they're not going to look so pretty. So I'm throwing a few in the top of each just for the visual pop of color that it presents. You can leave them out if they're not looking too good or if they're not in season. And then finally, to finish that off, we're going to add in a little bit of mint. Since, of course, we had the mint tea in there, this is going to reinforce it. One hint on garnishes is the garnish should always reflect the flavors that the guests can expect in the dish. However, if we just took a sprig of mint and put in there, yes, it adds a bright color, it reflects the flavor, but I know very few people that are going to take that piece of mint and pop that in their mouth and eat it. That's what's really referred to as a non-functional garnish. So instead, we're going to take the mint and do what's known as a chiffonade, which means we strip that off. Chiffonade is just a French term for thin strips of a leafy green. So we're going to roll that up into a nice, tight little roll, little mint cigarette there, if you will, and we're going to slice that into very fine threads. And doing so gives us that reflection of the flavor in the dish, allows us to add a little bit of color to it, but also does so in a manner where your guests can actually enjoy eating it and not have to kind of push it to the side and eat around it. So you get the best of both worlds that way. So there we have exotic spice-infused fruit cocktail garnished with a little fresh mint. A perfect brunch fruit item.